The Carla Walker case, kidnapped as in forgotten accordingly. The kidnapping. Before we dive into this chilling case, make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment, because the shadows of the past are about to come alive. The night was quiet until the scream cut through the air. In the parking lot outside the roller rink, Carla Walker's cry echoed as a man ripped open the car door where she sat with her boyfriend. A pistol gleamed in his hand. He struck her boyfriend across the head so hard that the boy slumped forward, bleeding and stunned. The stranger barked an order, dragging Carla out of the car. Her terrified voice carried into the night as he forced her into his own vehicle and sped away. It was the last time anyone would see her alive. One moment, Carla had been laughing with her boyfriend. The next, she was gone, vanished into the dark, leaving behind only shock, blood, and unanswered questions. The boy stumbled for help, clutching his injured head, trying to remember every detail of the man, every second of that horrible moment. But fear clouded everything, and by the time police arrived, the kidnapper and Carla had disappeared into the shadows of Fort Worth, Texas. Just hours earlier, the night had seemed ordinary. Carla Walker was 17 years old, a bright and lively high school cheerleader. She had gone on a Valentine's weekend date with her boyfriend, a boy she cared for deeply. They had spent the evening at a dance, then stopped by the local bowling alley and skating rink, places where teenagers laughed, flirted, and escaped the rules of home for a little while. To her friends, Carla seemed happy, glowing with the easy joy of a girl in love. She and her boyfriend decided to park the car outside the rink for a while, talking about life, about school, about nothing and everything at once. The small moments of teenage romance were supposed to be safe, in Uri. But safety was an illusion that night. The attack came so suddenly that it was hard to process. A stranger appearing out of the dark, a gun pressed to the side window, a threat barked through clenched teeth. The boyfriend barely had time to react before he was struck and left reeling. Carla's scream, high and desperate, rang out as she was dragged across the seat and ripped from the world she knew. For the police, the case began with chaos. Witnesses had little to offer beyond the sound of a struggle, the echo of a scream, and the sight of a car speeding away. The boyfriend, injured and dazed, tried to describe the man, strong, angry, determined, but the image in his mind blurred under the weight of fear and pain. In the hours that followed, panic spread through the community. Parents pulled their children close, locking doors and checking windows. Friends whispered that if this could happen to Carla, it could happen to anyone. Patrol cars combed the streets, headlights piercing alleys and fields, but every lead dissolved into nothing. And then, only days later, the fear deepened. Searchers discovered Carla's body in a drainage ditch, a few miles from where she had been taken. She was lifeless, discarded, her bright future stolen. The city of Fort Worth mourned, but mourning quickly turned into fear, and then into anger. Who had done this? Why? Rumors spread quickly. Some pointed to a stranger in town, others whispered that someone Carla knew could have been involved. Police clung to the few fragments of evidence: the boyfriend's shaken testimony, signs of violence, a community in shock, but none of it added up to a face, a name, a confession. The investigation had barely begun, but already cracks were showing. Evidence wasn't handled carefully, details slipped, and the chaos of a violent crime scene left more questions than answers. Carla's family begged for justice. Her friends left flowers at the school gym where she once cheered, and detectives struggled to keep up with the tidal wave of panic flooding the city. The kidnapper had seemed to vanish into thin air. And yet, even as people whispered about strangers in the night, police began to consider a darker question. What if Carla's killer wasn't a stranger at all, but someone closer than anyone dared to imagine? The investigation. The discovery of Carla Walker's body shattered any remaining hope. What began as a frantic search had turned into a homicide investigation, and the pressure on Fort Worth police was immediate. Parents in the city were terrified, reporters crowded outside the police station, and the community demanded answers. But the crime scene itself was already slipping away. Carla had been found in a drainage ditch, her body exposed to the elements. Rain had washed away footprints, mud had stained her clothing, and time had already begun erasing details that could have pointed to her killer. Detectives struggled to secure even the smallest pieces of evidence. The boyfriend, still recovering from the head wound inflicted that night, was questioned again and again. He remembered the man's gun, the force of the blow, and Carla's scream as she was pulled into another car, but everything after that was a blur. Some officers wondered if trauma had clouded his memory, or if he might be holding something back. In the court of public opinion, suspicion had a way of spreading quickly, and even victims weren't safe from whispers. Still, detectives pressed forward. They gathered fibers, fingerprints, and whatever trace evidence could be recovered from the ditch. But this was the 1970s. DNA analysis didn't exist yet. Technology was limited, and the science of solving crimes hadn't caught up with the brutality of what had happened to Carla. For now, police had to rely on eyewitness testimony, hunches, and the cooperation of the community. That cooperation came with challenges. Rumors swept through the city like wildfire. Some swore they saw a suspicious man near the rink that night. Others claimed a stranger had been lurking around high school football games. Neighbors began to look at one another with unease. Doors that once stayed unlocked were suddenly bolted, and age girls no longer walked home after dark. Detectives followed dozens of leads. A known criminal who had been spotted in the area was brought in. His alibi fell apart quickly, but there was no evidence tying him to Carla. A drifter who had been camping nearby was questioned for days, but nothing linked him to the crime. Each suspect looked promising, until the evidence fell apart. Carla's family endured every painful step of the investigation. Her parents appeared at press conferences, begging for information. Her friends held candlelight vigils, clutching photographs of the girl who once cheered on Friday nights. The grief was overwhelming, but the silence from Carla's killer was louder still. As weeks turned into months, the pressure on police grew unbearable. Newspapers demanded answers. The public wanted someone arrested. Yet every time detectives thought they were close, the case slipped through their fingers. A footprint found at the ditch didn't match anyone. Fibers collected from Carla's dress were too common to trace. The trail grew colder with each passing day. Then came the turning point. One of the investigators uncovered a potential connection to a man with a violent history in the area. He was known to carry a gun. He had a reputation for cruelty, and more importantly, people whispered he had been seen around the roller rink before Carla's abduction. Detectives felt the surge of hope. Could this finally be the break they needed? Surveillance began, and the man was brought in for questioning. He sat under the harsh glow of the interrogation room, his hands folded calmly as detectives laid out what they had. But he denied everything. He claimed he didn't even know Carla. With no physical evidence to tie him to the crime, investigators faced a wall of frustration. Every piece of circumstantial evidence felt promising, but it wasn't enough to stand up. In court, the case teetered on the edge of collapse, and Carla's name began to fade from headlines. And then, just as hope dimmed, something shocking happened. Another young woman reported being attacked in a chillingly similar way. She survived, and her story echoed Carla's in ways that detectives could not ignore. The ghost of 1974. Decades passed, but Carla Walker's case refused to die. For her family, every year without answers felt like a wound that never healed. For Fort Worth detectives, her name lingered like a ghost in the files, a reminder of the one that got away. The 1970s had ended with frustration. The 1980s brought nothing new, and by the 1990s, the case was fading into memory until science changed everything. DNA testing arrived, and detectives pulled Carla's file from the shelf once again. The evidence was thin: fibers, swabs, fragments of clothing sealed in bags for nearly 20 years. Time had eaten away at the samples, but it hadn't erased them completely. When the first tests came back, the results were tantalizing. There was DNA, male DNA, that didn't belong to Carla, her boyfriend, or anyone in her family. It was the strongest lead they had ever found. But the technology wasn't ready. The profile was incomplete, too degraded for a direct match. The evidence had whispered, but not shouted. For Carla's family, it was another cruel twist. So close, yet still no justice. The years rolled on. Carla's parents grew old, carrying the weight of grief. Her friends married, had children, and watched the world move forward. But the story of Carla, the cheerleader whose life was stolen on Valentine's weekend, never stopped haunting Fort Worth. Then, in the 2000s, true crime media brought her case back to life. Documentaries, TV shows, and podcasts told her story, spreading it far beyond Texas. Strangers who had never known Carla began demanding answers. Her photo, forever frozen at 17, became a symbol of innocence stolen and justice denied. And then, in 2020, hope returned once more. New breakthroughs in forensic genealogy were cracking cases once thought impossible. Detectives tested Carla's evidence again, using the tiny DNA profile to search vast family trees. For the first time in decades, there was movement. A name emerged, a man who had lived his life in plain sight. His name was Glenn McCurley. At the time of Carla's murder, he had been questioned briefly because he owned the same type of gun used in the attack on Carla's boyfriend. But back then, nothing tied him directly to the crime. He slipped through the cracks, living quietly in Fort Worth for more than 40 years. When detectives approached him in 2020, they asked for a voluntary DNA sensitivity sample. He agreed, perhaps believing time had buried his secret. But the science spoke. His DNA matched the profile preserved from Carla's clothing. The ghost of 1974 had finally been unmasked. The arrest made headlines across the country. At last, Carla's family had a name, a face, a man who had stolen their daughter. In court, the evidence was undeniable. Faced with the mountain of DNA proof and decades of guilt, McCurley confessed. For Carla's family, it was bittersweet. Justice had come, but it had taken nearly half a century. Carla had been gone longer than she had lived. The trial brought closure, but not healing. As one of her relatives said, "Justice delayed is justice denied, but at least we finally have the truth." Carla Walker's story ended in 1974, but her case became proof of something larger, that time does not always protect the guilty, that science can reach into the past and drag secrets into the light. And even now, her name lingers. In Fort Worth, people still remember the cheerleader whose life was cut short, and how her case showed both the failures and triumphs of justice. The killer thought he had gotten away with murder. For decades, he had lived as a free man, but Carla Walker's ghost never stopped haunting him. And in the end, science gave her back her voice. The case was solved, but the lesson endures. Shadows may stretch long, but truth has a way of breaking through. If you thought this story was chilling, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe before the shadows find you first.